first thank Ann Montague. She put this thing together, and it's just a wonderful idea, and I'm glad it's happened. And again, thank you, Ann. So in 1987, this organization was kind of a sleepy Public Employees Association. And well, we probably all got about the same thing to say. I'm going to keep mine really short, and I'll tell you why in a second. But it really changed then. I wasn't on board. I started in 1991, and I was there for the strike in 95. And I do believe that those two strikes built this union into what it is now. A very, very powerful organization in politics in this state. And we owe it to these people sitting up here, amongst others. And I think it's just incredible that we're going to be able to listen to them talk about how we got to where we got at that time, because it was a huge difference in what this organization was before. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the inimitable Alice Dale, who I have always had such tremendous respect for, and who I believe really has been the guiding light that started us on the path that we've been following ever since. And so with that, Alice, please. Oh, and I'm bailing out, and I'm going to tell you why. We've all sacrificed way too many hours of family time to this union. And tonight, my two sons invited me to go to the Trailblazer game tonight with them, and I'm not passing it up. So thank you, Alice, Carla, and everybody else here. It's been a tremendous run. Thank you.
Well, it is really great to be here. Some of you know I have a bit of a voice issue, so if it gets out, just hang in there and I'll kind of croak it out here. There is something very special about the rolling strike of 1987. And in part because it was the culmination of a 2-year plan to change our union. And it was about really building a culture of activism. And so that's why I picked that as the topic for tonight. It was the first time that state workers were engaged in a really broad-based struggle that was militant, where they stood up for themselves and unapologetically demanded fair treatment and respect on the job. I believe there is nothing like the unity of purpose and the unquestionable exercise of power and how it builds very deep connections and gives us strength to continue the fight to keep building the union. So Greg has given you a little prelude, but in 1985, if we look back, the reputation of the union was poor. As he said, you know, it wasn't really a union. People called it an association. Some people said it was a tea and crumpet society. Some people said we were a paper tiger. We had experienced net losses of 500 members per year over 4 years running by the time we got to 1985. And so we had also less than 50% membership in many of the state agencies. We had 13, I said 15, but it's 13 to 15 sub-locals that did not have fair share. And in 1983, our largest local, ODOT, attempted to leave the union, and under a theory of friendly decertification, friendly decert. There was a group of us at the union that said there is no friendly decert. It doesn't happen. So we fought back, they stayed, and that was really critically important to the union. Overall, our membership was around 11,800, and that was with bargaining units of about 18,000, if you included the strikeable and non-strikeable, etc. So the 1985 contract settlement had a banner in the Statesman Journal that said, OPEU caves in. Again. Okay, so it was completely demoralizing, as you might imagine. And the board of directors and the executive director decided he should leave. That was sort of the catalyst for that occurring. I was then hired. I came back to the union where I'd been for 5 years before, been gone for a couple of years. And it was pretty clear we needed to rebuild. Now the good news, we had actually a great set of new leaders. Kate Smith was the president, John Vickers the vice president, Bill Street, secretary-treasurer. They were all very progressive. They were willing to take risks, and they were absolutely committed to building a stronger, more effective union. So we adopted a program to increase membership, to recruit and train union stewards, and to increase the political strength of the union. I mentioned to Melissa just a bit ago, at the time, in 1985, at General Council, we did this big push for voluntary political contributions. At that time, the union raised $25,000 a year in voluntary political contributions. So we had a program that embraced the most fundamental piece of what it takes to have a good union, and that's a focus on organizing. And it didn't take a genius to figure out that the union's membership needed to grow, not shrink, if we were going to have any kind of power and deliver for our membership. So after about 6 months of working on our organizing program with the SEIU Public Division Director, the job that Heather now has, as a woman from San Francisco, it became clear that we needed to hire an organizing director. So we had the great good fortune of hiring Michael Krebosch, who is not physically with us tonight, but I'm sure he is with us tonight. And Michael was brilliant. I could cry.
If this would happen. Anyway. Sorry. All right, reverb. Anyway, Michael was irreverent, and he absolutely understood how workers could build power and how we could put workers in motion. And so I would say that without any question, he was a huge benefit to the union, and he was the mastermind of the rolling strike, which Carla will talk to us about later. So by 1987, okay, the statewide, let me get my tears out of the way. Our statewide membership was over 70%. We had, over a period of 2 years, added 3,600 members, which, when you consider we had under 12,000, was pretty significant. There are other changes that happened. Grievances were examined for whether there was an opportunity for direct action rather than just filing a grievance and meeting with HR. Our stewards began representing workers in grievances, and the idea here was that we really wanted to change the relationship with management and have managers be accountable to rank and file worksite leaders and the membership. We also wanted to have members see that they were able to affect change through collective action. We wanted to be clear that the work of building the union that we were engaged in was really about having successful bargaining in '87, and workers completely understood that. So there are lots and lots of good stories of direct action, but one I want to share with you tonight is there was a man, Kevin Kincannon, who was the head of DHS, and our members at the Oregon State Hospital were being denied vacations because there wasn't enough staffing. So a group of workers took over his office, Kevin's, and demanded that they hire 2 additional workers so people could have vacations. And after many hours, they refused to leave, and he agreed to hire 2 additional staff. Now, you can imagine, this was such a great example of how workers in action can affect a change. We could never win at the bargaining table because it was a permissive subject to bargaining. And it changed the way people thought about the union and their capacity to affect change. So the concept we had was that we would engage members in increasingly escalating types of activities. So by the time we got back into bargaining, walking off the job to force the state to reasonable concessions would be relatively natural and an easier transition.
And so now we'll turn to, oh, and the other thing is, a cultural shift was that our field staff were called business agents. And we decided we're doing away with that, okay? They are internal organizers, everyone agreed, and their job was to organize the workplace and to support activists in doing the work of the union. So, in 1987, bargaining happened, and the strategy, the rolling strike and the flying squadron, were borrowed from the United Auto Workers. Carla's going to talk more about the specifics of what it meant when she was a rank-and-file activist engaged in the strike. But some background. We formed this broad-based leadership bargaining coordination committee, which augmented the bargaining team, and they adopted the strategy. Michael Krivosh developed it, he presented it, we agreed to it, and from the polling that we had done of our membership, we knew that people would strike for about 5 days. We also knew that wasn't enough, right? So we had to develop a strategy that would extend that time frame. And so we needed something that we would lead like with our strongest units in state government, and we mobilized a group called the Flying Squadron, who were people who committed to staying out for the duration of the strike, however long it took. And then the idea is that we would have roles, waves of workers going out in different state agencies. So we wanted a strike strategy that was dynamic. We called it Striking Smarter, because it was definitely weird, so we had to figure out a way to make that sound appropriate, which it was. We wanted to galvanize the membership. We wanted to keep the state off balance, which we did. And we also legitimately wanted to be able to say to the public that we are trying to minimize the impact on public services while at the same time forcing the state to agree to reasonable demands at the bargaining table. We knew if we could win a statewide strike, which there had never been a statewide strike, that we could solidify changing the culture of the union. It was a defining moment internally and externally. And Michael used to say to us, if you're not having fun, you're not organizing. We heard that a lot. And the rolling strike was fun, it was exciting, it was impactful, and it changed everything. So it was the beginning of a long period of growth, of victories and improvements in workers' lives at SEIU Local 503, which would not be the union it is today, I believe, without that culture of activism that dates back to that time period. So, that's it. So I will introduce Anne to you. I too want to thank her and also thank Lynn for putting this together. This is really fabulous. After 30 years, I think it is time to celebrate a milestone in the history of the union and see if there are some kernels that we can harvest for future fights. Anne is an activist to the core. Those of you who know her, she's been a part of many, many victories and advances in SEIU Local 503. The rolling strike, pay equity, creation of the Lavender Caucus, minimum wage increase campaigns, 2 of them, and the home care organizing campaigns. She and an SEIU West Coast organizer developed and delivered the first 503 training on homophobia, which I can assure you was highly controversial at the time they did this. She did it with a person that some of you might know. Her name is Mary Kay Henry.
First off, I'd like John Lepink and Thea to stand up, or where are you? Yeah. You're our cooks. And I know your daughter also was involved in the desserts. And also I really want to thank the Portland Retirees Group, because they're really the ones. I mean, if this was just me, it couldn't happen. And they were there behind. Also, I wanted to talk to, appreciate the staff a lot, Bob with communications, and Emily just doing everything that she can to support us. And so we really appreciate that. So Carla and I are going to, we are the rank and file. We were on the rank and file in 1987. And so we are going to kind of give a personal explanation of what it was like for us. And for me, I wasn't even on the board. I didn't even know there was going to be a rolling strike. I just knew we were going to be striking smarter, and that certainly sounded like a good idea. That was before 1986. So it's important to remember, and I know Alice emphasized too, that we organized for a good 2 years before we launched the rolling strike. I want to just address two areas. One is we know that the struggles, in the beginning of the 80s, there was a recession. This all sounds familiar. By this time, the decade was over half over. And every time we just waited to see, well, what's the governor going to put in their budget? That's going to be how much money we have to deal with. And so it was pretty ineffective. But the other thing was that around this time, and I think it was really a right-wing project, was to basically demonize state workers. And I'm not talking about going and looking at where there's waste at the top or management. It was specifically aimed at state workers. And then KATU, you may know, they caught on to this, and someone also you might know, Mark Haas, who has been in the legislature, was key and aggressive in having people call us, on my show, we're going to expose if some worker did something or other. In fact, he was so aggressive, he went down to state agencies to basically intimidate workers, and when workers talk about this, they may want to talk about confronting Mark Haas. And I had a co-worker, and she said, Ann, I'm trying to protect the public trust. And they're lying about us. They lie about us in the morning, and then I turn on 6 and 11, Mark Haas, and once again, they're attacking us. And so she, I think if we were talking about today, we'd kind of call it a microaggression, right? It's like every time you turn around, there's attack. And so that's why one of the key issues of this strike was respect and standing up for the work that we do. When people go out on strike, and many of you have been on strike probably more than once, but one of the things that happens when workers go out on strike, I kind of like to call it the I can see clearly, because all of a sudden you sort of see things the way they really are. And so you can immediately get rid of the myth that that the United States is not a class society. That becomes very clear. And that bosses own the press, which is why we had our great strike alerts, and politicians, both parties. And so what was happening was that people started to really understand who their friends were, and it was workers. And one of the things that we discovered is that workers, whether they are in unions or not, like it when people stand up. And that's what the polls were showing. We were popular. I mean, it was amazing. People really liked the fact that we were standing up for ourselves. And it was something, I think, probably because other workers knew how maligned state workers were, and they know how maligned they are. And so I think that probably kind of gave a push also to the fact of the support. And of course, we always loved Teamsters because they were stopping deliveries to going into state agencies. In talking about workers' power, I'm going to talk about the governor. A Democratic governor, just like all of them. And this is Oregon after all. So this has to do with him and the struggle with our union and how we dealt with it. So the first thing that happened was that we had the big strike vote. Everybody was hepped up all over the state. People knew it. So, the governor called Alice and said, "Do you really think you want to do this, Alice? You know, we could just sit down and, you know, work something out. Really, you really think you want to do this? And Alice said, yes, we're going to do it, and it's going to build our union. So the next thing that happened was that was right, I think we were very close to going out. And so then oh, by the way, his name is Neil Goldschmidt. So then the governor used another tactic, and he said, it's illegal. You know, the strike is illegal. There was some loophole found or whatever. I don't know what it was. And, you know, this is an illegal strike, Alice. Now, this is an attack on us, on our union, and the most important people in the strike are all the rank and file. But it was also an attack on Alice because we were going out, and he could put her in jail. Now, I've got to say, sorry, if that had happened, it would have been a big boon for us. You wouldn't find anybody in their cubicle the next day, you know. So, once again, he backed off of that. And the next thing, but throughout the strike, he threatened us with a lockout, which is pretty stupid because bosses want a lockout when it's a week strike, right? So they want to scare the people that are out. You know, you're not going to be able to come back until there's a settlement and try to get people to go back in. But our strike got stronger. Every time we went out, it got stronger. So that didn't really have that much effect. So I want to go back to the issue on illegal. I was going to say that about it being illegal. And because I don't think we can underestimate Alice's courage and strength in terms of the success of this strike. So I'm going to just say it, you know, we're all friends here. So 6 months ago, the great union of SEIU 1000, huge, you know how in California they love to have those big, I guess, strong unions. They said, gave a notice, we're going to go on strike for 1 day. And I thought, well, this is good. It's a public sector. They're California workers or whatever. And Jerry Brown, their governor, said, oh, well, we think that's illegal. And so they said, oh, okay, never mind, we won't do that. Just an example of why the leadership is important. The rank and file is the most important, but having that strong leadership is exceedingly important. So this was our experience. The other thing I have to talk about Postman a little bit more. So you can imagine that just like now, we have people who are out there getting him elected and felt betrayal, of course. And one of the favorite signs that people had was, Neil, we walked for you, you walked on us, we're walking out. And we saw those all over. So I do want to say that for people here that are on CAPE and the board, just to let you know, and so maybe some of this history will explain why people of our cohorts who have been through these strikes with Democratic governors, like, we're not into taking selfies with the governor. This is such a bizarre thing in our union. And because we understand what their role is, and it is contentious, and we need to struggle to get whatever we want from the governor. So so we're not so interested in having our picture taken with him, or it's kind of not the direction that we go. So the question is, what did we win? And of course, the most important thing we won was we became a union, and we became a strong union and a combative union. But I was talking to Conda Walsh, who some of you know, and she wasn't able to come. She's in a lot of pain, so she wasn't able to come. But she had made a statement that I want to share when she said what the union meant for her, for the strike meant for her. She said, I learned to never back down no matter the opposition, we can always win. And to me, that was what we won. But we also won a few other things. So we did win. We did break the governor's budget for the first time ever, which says you are not trapped needing to wait for that budget, or you are not trapped once you see that budget to say that is how we're going to negotiate wages and benefits. The other thing that we got a few other things. We maintained fully paid health care. We got 10% raises for 480 women who are in the pay equity classes that Margaret will be talking a little bit more about. And I think it was a 5% raise for another 800, and a COLA, and selectives, and I can't remember what else. I might have left out something. But so we did win. Oh, well, so the amount of money that we got was an additional $9.1 million into our contract, and that was about, not that you should figure it out this way. Krivosh would hate for me to say that the strike is about, exactly how much money, but it was the equivalent of $1 million for every day that we were on strike. So, right, so that was a great success. So when we think of where we went, and then we go back, and we've been going back and thinking about, where I was, when I was at Oregon State University. I went to my first union meeting, and there was one other woman there. This is Oregon State University. There was one, and she was the wife of a guy in computer science. But things in 1986 were about to change. And the reason they were about to change is that our next speaker, Margaret Halleck, developed a campaign and an organizing strategy, and she's an economist who actually can talk to anyone about how they're underpaid. That was the next move that we began. And so, Margaret Halleck.
Well, thanks, Ann. This is really, really great and fun to review all of these developments and just think about, really, this union would not, I agree completely with what was just said, that we would not have the union that we have today without these developments. We built the union in 1987, and one way we did that was we changed how women viewed their work and their union.
Woo!
Without that activism, I don't think the rolling strike would have been successful, and clearly we would not have pay equity. And it was just the most rewarding thing that we did. So for the first time, I think, a lot of the women, state workers, became proud of the work that they do and mad about how much they were paid for doing it.
Yeah.
So as with other things, this is a very long time in coming. We spent 2 years organizing for pay equity, but before that, we spent 2 years doing a very tedious and complicated and overly complicated analysis of the compensation and classification system of the state. And I had I don't know, maybe it was good. I was the chair of the task force that reviewed the state compensation and classification system, and it ended up just being kind of collapsing of its own weight at the end, and Governor Attia vetoed the small amount of money that came out of that study. But we learned some important things in that study. We learned that, and these were the findings of this task force, that women, the female-dominated jobs in state government were undervalued compared to equivalent jobs by 20 to 30%. So the work that women did was undervalued. That was the headline that was all over the place. So some examples. We found that workers who take care of people earn a lot less than workers who took care of things. So one example was at the universities, the workers in the child development centers earn less than the attendants, the overnight attendants that had to watch the zebrafish or the mice in the labs. That they were deemed to have more skill, effort, and responsibility. The women again at university, but this was true all around the state, they were called clerical workers then. They're now known as administrative assistants and they were office specialists. But they, in my view, totally ran the universities. The university would completely fall apart without these workers. And their job descriptions were so vague that no one could really see the work that was going on, and they were paid astonishingly low wages. So, for example, a woman who was in charge of a very complicated, big science department earned less than the person who delivered the campus mail. A lot less. That was another. So another example is that we found that welfare workers, huge responsibility. The child workers, the AFS workers, were not paid adequately for that responsibility that they had of viewing the welfare systems. So after this big technical exercise, we didn't get what we wanted, and Alice came. We started this organizing campaign, and it was so clear that pay equity was going to be a big part of this. So I always viewed the whole pay equity campaign in two phases, the kind of the technical phase and the organizing phase. And we went out and took our findings from the task force to campuses and to the agencies. And we talked to women about their jobs, and for the first time, women started to think, yes, what I do is undervalued. They don't know what I do. They don't recognize the job that I'm doing. I'm not adequately recognized for the work that I'm doing, and that was exactly right. And I think one of the really breakthrough things that we did, and I want to shout out to Ann here, because we needed higher ed in this campaign, and she was at OSU, and we kind of started there, and we did these pay equity hearings where women would come. We invited the legislators, but they were supposed to just sit and listen. They weren't going to talk. We were going to talk. And so we had women stand up and show their pay stubs to these legislators and say, this is what I do. And they would describe these complicated jobs. And then they would say, and this is what I take home for it. And the president of the university just kind of sat there and started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then the next day in the paper, there's a picture of him saying, it's a travesty. Took ownership of their work and that they were lower paid. And a couple of workers came out and said, I qualify for food stamps, for housing vouchers. I can't feed my kids at the end of the month. I shouldn't have to rely on welfare if I work full time for the state. And that became another thing. So they were earning poverty level wages for important work and for skilled work, and for work that clearly was worth more than they were being paid for. So as these pay equity hearings kind of rolled through, women got a sense of, oh, I see, my voice matters, it works. These worksite actions started to bring out more and more women, and it was the first taste of power. And I'm just so proud and happy that when women feel that power, men are just not going to give it up. Give it up. So I think that the women were a key part of the flying squadron, and Carla talked about this later, the workers that really helped organize all these agencies. We would go into these agencies, blow the whistle when it was their turn to go out on this rolling strike. You know, we went through these agencies, and a lot of those strikers were women. I believe it would not have happened without that pay equity campaign. Okay, so now, so one of those incredible women that built our union, Carla Brogels,
I was Carla Robles then. It's hard to keep
He's going to
track.
speak next. So Carla was an organizer in Adult and Family Services, AFS, and she was a rank and file striker during this strike. But this is exactly how we built union leadership and women as those new leaders. So after that, she became she was elected president of the union, then she was on staff with the union as an organizer, central to developing the political strategy for SEIU in subsequent years, and is a heroine for the union. Carla.
Well, this really is a lot of fun. I wanted to start out by saying thanks to everybody for putting this together. And there's some people who are not here today that I wanted to recognize, and I hope I can do it right. Lucy Lair. And Michael Prevosh. Vinny Sadowski, Alan Willis. There were a lot of people that were really central to the success of that first strike, and I have some funny stories to tell about them too. I was the shop steward in Florence in 1987, and I had just been elected to be the assistant executive director of the board of directors for then called OPEU. And I was very proud of that position. I went to all the board meetings, even though I was told I didn't need to. I sat in the back of the room and I learned a lot. I cleaned up Alice's evaluation one time. That was when they were hired, the executive director was hired. And it was, anyway, that's another story too. But I will always remember being in the room. I know there'd been a lot of work building up to the strike, the strategy, the organizing. I really didn't know a lot about that. I was pretty new. But I will always remember Michael Prevosh getting up there and laying out this plan for a top secret strike. And I was thinking to myself, how are we going to keep this a secret? But I was also thinking how brilliant this plan was, because what we were going to be doing is analyzing our most strong work areas and taking those people out, letting everybody else go to work, and management was thinking we were going to have a statewide strike. They had no idea what a rolling strike was. I didn't even have an idea at that time. But it caused chaos. They were, the state hospital was a prime example, because that's a 24-hour care facility and they're required by law to have certain staffing levels. So they pulled managers in from all over the state. I mean, they were bodies on top of bodies at the state hospital, and then all of the workers showed up to work. And they're like, what's going on? So it was really a great strategy, and I was really proud because I lived in Florence, and as well as Roseanne, we were considered the strongest district in the state. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the other districts, but we were the strongest. And so we were going out first, and so I was really excited about that. But how do you keep it a secret? Well, we weren't supposed to know we were the first to go out until the very last minute, but we had sneaking suspicions that it would be us. And I was just a shop steward. I really didn't have a lot of experience, and I didn't have, I was just along for the ride, kind of. And they put me in charge of Florence to Brookings. That's how the union does things. They just throw you in and you just go for it. And my job was to get up early in the morning and take off down to Coos Bay, and I stopped at every work site on the way down. I took the numbers on the participation levels. What did the strike the strikers need at each work site. And I'll never forget one woman came up to me and she said, "I'm just here to tell you that if we don't have fried chicken gizzards from Safeway, this strike is not going to happen." So we got fried chicken gizzards today. One time I landed in Coos Bay. That was where I spent the rest of my day. And I was working with a very talented man. He and Michael Krivosh were really good friends. I think they came as a package. His name is Benny Zabowski. And he is also, he's passed away too, but he was brilliant. And I walked out of the strike line and we had great participation. We had strike captains at every work site. But at the Coos Bay AFS office, we had some scabs. And when I showed up at like 10 o'clock, some workers came up to me and they says, "We're really pissed. They're making us do things we don't feel comfortable doing." I go, "What are you doing?" "Well, they made us hold hands so the scabs couldn't come through the picket line." And I'm very indignant. I said, "This is our strike. This is our union. We get to decide what we're going to do." And I went to talk to Benny. And I told Benny, I says, "What's this all about?" He says, "Well, Carla, the picket captains decided to do this morning." So I says, "Oh, okay." So it was a rank and file decision to get a little bit more militant about holding hands and making people break through hands to get into the buildings. So after the strike, and the other thing I want to say about Mike Krivosh in this presentation he gave to the board, he said it'll be easy to get people to come out. It'll be easy. What will be hard is getting people to go back in. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. Because part of why this strike is so brilliant is because people are knowing they can give up 3 days' salary and go back to work. We needed to maintain discipline at going back in, right? But we had a really hard time getting people to go back in, and the reason, it's pretty easy to understand, once you're given a platform to fight back, you want to stay in the fight until it's finished. And that's what these folks are. So my job after we rolled back in is that I was supposed to make sure everybody went back to work. Because Benny left. He went on to other things. And so I'm going up and down the freeway, checking on all the work sites. And I was also tasked with the wonderful strike newsletter that was put out every day. I was supposed to leaflet the AFS office in Coos Bay. Well, they had a manager there who was a real jerk, and he was married to my manager. And he wouldn't let me in. He says, "Well, you're not the business agent. You can't be in this building if you don't work here." And well, Benny had told me that I needed to deliver these flyers, and so that was what I was going to do. And so I refused to leave. And I was sitting in a chair surrounded by managers like this, and my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I was going to get arrested. And a rank and file CSD worker who was also involved, Andrew McGuire. I'll never forget watching him walk down the hallway and he's snapping his fingers, what's going on? And I was like, oh God, somebody I know. And he diffused the situation. We were able to deliver the flyers. And I wanted Doug Hunter to get fired for that, but that was another. I think I was the closest to being arrested during that strike. Michael Krivosh offered a steak dinner to anybody who would get arrested. And I think there were a lot of people vying for that prize. So after we came back, and Ann did a great job of talking about all the wins that we got during that contract. I'm telling you, this was like the most fun time in my life. And a big shout out to the staff then, because 1 month after that strike, we were at General Counsel in Portland. Can you imagine the work that goes into General Counsel, and then to put that on top of everything that we had done through the strike. It was nothing short of miraculous. But a bunch of us got together and we decided that we were going to take over the AFS Local because it was like a rudderless ship. And so Lucy Lair, Roseanne, Tom Syker, oh, I can't remember, there were just a whole bunch of us. I don't know if you can remember all the rest of them, but we commandeered a shopping cart and took turns riding it down to the Church of Elvis, had a few drinks, and we pledged a loyalty to each other and to the AFS Local that we were going to build this local and we were going to make it what it is today. Catherine might have a picture of that too, the wonderful Church of Elvis. So there were so many great leaders that came out of that strike and so much excitement that we knew we were part of something that was changing who we were, and it was something that made us proud of ourselves. And I really felt pretty honored to be a part of that. And I didn't know anything when I started out. We were just, Roseanne and I were going to District 6 meetings, and we were just getting acquainted, and I met all of you. Lucy, it was like so phenomenal. And I have a great ending statement here, but I don't remember where it is.
Probably at the end.
It's probably at the end, thank you, Mike. So I guess my final remarks are that when we are inspired to stand up for what is right and just, we will always be on the right side of history. And the rolling strike of 1987 was just the transformation that we needed. It's probably one of the most important times in my life, and I'm truly thankful for the leadership of Alice and Kay and Michael and all of the others who were so instrumental at that pivotal time in our history. Thank you. And I'm now supposed to introduce Michael, and I think the thing that I'm most fond about Michael is he's one of my best dance partners. And he was one of the organizers that helped with the strike, and he's got a few remarks to make too. And then we're going to open it up and have questions and discussion.
Thank you, Carla. Jeff was supposed to have to move this stuff up here because I got a notebook, and so I'm just going to, the Luddite that I am, I'm going to destroy some technology here. 30 years, I can't believe that it's been 30 years. I mean, it's like, in some ways, it seems like yesterday. And my charge today was to talk about the strike and its implications for today, and moving forward. What's the implication for where we're at now in the labor movement? And I want to quickly divide. I know people like there, I can tell in reading the audience, there's a lot of folks out there just gnawing at the bit to say something themselves, so I'm going to keep my remarks somewhat short, but there are some points that I want to get out that have already been stated, frankly, but I'll try and put a little bit of a different twist on them. And also, before I get started, I want to acknowledge somebody in the audience today who, frankly, in my opinion, should be up here with us today. And he was really integral in making this thing happen. That's Giles Gibson, who's sitting in the back. Giles was a supervisor in the Salem office, I believe, during the strike, and really did as much as anybody did in making that thing successful. And I've got something I'm going to allude to that Giles participated in. So lessons for today. I think they're many and varied. Not the least of which is what has been talked about kind of as an overarching theme. And sometimes, frankly, I think we forget this. Direct action works. It historically has worked, it works now, and it will work on into the future. And we can never, ever lose sight of that. I think we kind of get numb sometimes as an organization and remove the movement from the labor movement. And I think the strike or direct action, I'm going to put it in terms of direct action because to me, a strike is a direct action. So if the category of direct action, strike is one element to direct action, right? And it has both a long-term and a short-term benefit. I think the short-term benefit was what Margaret was talking about, the gains, if you will, the stuff that we're able to get at the bargaining table. Long-term would be the fact, as Alice was alluding to earlier, it changed the culture of the organization, right? Into forever in a day, long-lasting impact on the organization, which had a long-lasting impact on the labor movement in this state, and it should not be overlooked, it had a long-lasting impact on the Service Employees International Union. Now I'm going to talk about that at the end. First I want to talk about the movement. We have the labor movement. I would divide, it would be a great exercise to divide labor from movement. What I want to focus on is movement. And what characterizes a movement? What are those characteristics? And I would just offer a few. And I think it's something that we need an infusion of in the labor movement today. It's risk-taking. We need to take more risk. We have to have a vision. We need to develop a vision and work towards that vision vis-a-vis direct action. If you're not causing heartburn for somebody in this business, then you have to question what the hell you're doing. Because you should make people uncomfortable every day. We should make people have heartburn every day. It's a movement. It's not a labor organization, it's a labor movement. And in that, you change individuals, and as you change individuals, you change societies along the line of social and economic gains. The other thing about direct action, it is quintessential, I think as Carla was getting to, it is quintessential leadership development. We can never lose sight of that. The best leaders get developed vis-a-vis direct action, vis-a-vis the participation in the campaigns, not in a class working towards a certificate. And we can never forget that. There's leaders that are in this organization today that are products of direct action, products of that strike. It would have never probably showed up to be on a bylaws committee or something, right? I mean, John Lembick, who I've had on the road with me many times in Colorado and Arizona, organizing workers. John became the activist that he is because of doing stuff, participating in organizing. And so I want to take that direct action and transition to a little bit about some examples, not so much the strike itself, but leading up to the strike. We need to bring back political theater. We did a lot of theater as a lead up to that strike. One of what Giles did, one of my all-time favorites, was the, I don't even know what to call it, but him and Benny Zaboski were running around the state office building. One was playing Abraham Lincoln, that was Giles because he happens to be 6'7" and 6'10" with a stovetop hat on his head. And it was, I think they wanted to take away Lincoln's birthday, is that what it was? So it was the death of Lincoln, and Benny was John Wilkes Booth running around with a cap pistol, chasing Giles around the lunchroom at the state office building in Salem. So I implored on the leadership of this organization to bring back theater, bring back political theater. It's very important. And it's fun. And it's fun. And so I want to transition a little bit and talk about the importance, there again, theme being the implication for today, the importance of planning, both short and long-term planning. And I don't don't think we do enough long-term planning. As Alice has talked about earlier, it was a 2-year plan that we were implementing. There's a lot of plan development that gets developed in the context of a 2-year plan than the short-term plans. But it was a long-term plan. It was a vision, right? And in a movement, you have to have that vision. Good example. Most people in our society, much to my chagrin, think of the fact that Rosa Parks got on a bus, had tired feet, got on a bus one day, and decided to take a seat. Nothing could be further from the truth. Rosa Parks was a product of the Highlander School in Tennessee. It was a planned action. It was part of a larger strategy to deal with the issues of the times, segregation in the South. It was a part of a plan. It wasn't a spontaneous action. And it was like, and we cannot forget that these things are products of planning. I was recently brought to my attention a quote by Albert Einstein when he was presented with a question of, if you had 60 minutes to solve a problem, what would you do? His response was, he said, I would spend the first 55 minutes thinking about it, and I would spend 5 minutes solving the problem. And I think that speaks very directly to preparation. It speaks very directly to planning. A note on polling. We used polling in the strike to help us develop a strategy. We did not use polling to dictate policy. Polling should never be a substitute for the establishment of goals and objectives. Polling should be used to inform a strategy and help you develop a strategy to reach those goals and objectives. So preparation is very important. So before we had the strike, what were we doing for preparation? Political theater, a lot of political theater. We had unity breaks all across the state. Flatbed trucks. Jamie Partridge was on a flatbed truck singing songs at the work site on Northeast 8th and Davis, I believe it was, in Portland. Flatbed truck pulls up at noon, everybody comes out on a unit break, and we sing songs together. Theater, songs, food, culture. Those things are very important in building a movement. They cannot ever be overlooked. So leading up to the strike, there was, I had the honor of doing a work-in out in Beaverton at what was CSD at the time. One of the major issues we were dealing with at the bargaining table, and this speaks very directly to what goes on in the field versus what's going on at the bargaining table, and the link between the two. You don't win contracts at the bargaining table. For my money, the labor movement right now puts too much emphasis on this mystery around the table. There's no fucking mystery around the table. You win contracts in the field. In the field. And so the issue was workload. So we did a work-in where the members brought their sleeping bags and their pillows and their pajamas to work. And so we didn't go on strike. We refused to leave work. And worked on into the evening. We got tremendous media play over it. The workers loved it. Leadership development. That is leadership development to the max. So by the time we got to the strike, as I think Alice had alluded to, we had done all this prep work with theater, direct actions, work-ins, and so on and so forth, that we were priming the pump. Before you get water, you prime the pump, right? And that made the strike, I wouldn't say it was easy, because I can remember being very, very, very tired for 2 weeks leading up to the strike. Countless meetings, as Carla was talking about. Meeting after meeting after meeting, planning and stuff. And it's like, how am I ever going to last through this to the strike, but by the time we went on strike, it was just euphoric, right? You were just living on adrenaline every day. A couple things that jump out to me that we did. Damage Hospital. We took them out at midnight. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. It was like workers got off the shift, and the ones that showed up for the shift did not go into work. And it was a natural high, as we used to say. It was incredible, the energy that was generated. I think it was the roll, one of the first, that morning was when the first roll was going to come out. I believe that was the case when we took damage out. I also had the privilege of taking out the state office building in Portland in the middle of the day. We were each assigned a floor on the state office building, and we went through there with whistles blowing and basically emptied out the state office building in the middle of the day, marched people down in the streets of Portland to a rally on the park blocks, and where PSU workers were going out on strike. Can you imagine taking a workforce out in the middle of the day with like 95% participation? It doesn't happen without planning. It doesn't happen without a lead up. It doesn't happen. Rosa Parks just didn't get on the bus with tired feet and decide not to sit down. And you don't empty out an office building without planning and preparation. Last but not least, I'm over my 6 minutes, but what the hell. So the aftermath. I guess the one thing, there's a lot that happened after the strike. Carla alluded it to earlier. Tremendous influx of new leadership in the organization that in some cases lives on today, either in terms of staff or in terms of some member leaders that are still standing. So you know you're successful when you see that influx of leadership. There again, to me, campaigns, direct action, that's how you develop leaders. You know you're successful when we found ourselves in the wake of the strike, traveling around the country with other SEIU locals talking about what we did. And I've never been in a position where it was like people were just like bowing down. It's like, wow, they heard about the rolling strike in Oregon. It was like we were heroes, you know, we were working class heroes. Giving presentations. I happened to give a presentation to Andy Stern's old local in Pennsylvania, and it was tremendously well received. We gained respect as an organization and gained a lot of, in my mind, started off really the gaining of the political power really started to evolve in the wake of that strike, in terms of turning over the power of the union into the political arena. I think it caused to have subsequent state negotiations take on a whole different tenor. I mean, really the gains you make from going out on a strike of that nature really show up in subsequent contracts, just because the expectations are elevated when you go up to the table the next time around. And it really vaulted 503 into the national scene with regard to the international also. And you can see that as we have, much to my chagrin, but we've continued to feed leadership to the international, and people keep leaving and stuff, and it's like, hey, what's up, man? But to me, the aftermath, I'll end this with my turn to cry. With a story of really what the strike meant for me. I was I had the honor and the privilege to be coordinating the strike in Corvallis and Albany and Lebanon. That's that Central Valley area. There was a woman, and I don't remember her name, much to my regret. For the purpose of the story, I'm going to call her Edith. She worked in the kitchen at OSU, worked the steam line, feeding snot-nosed brats food for her entire life, put 2 kids through college herself, a single mom, 95 pounds soaking wet. And at Oregon State, we put picket lines up in the middle of the night, or it seemed like the middle of the night, so we could block the trucks coming into the kitchen delivering the food. So we had to put a picket line up, and these women were great. Like, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, we're blocking trucks that are making deliveries to Oregon State, and they were turning around and dumping their wares across the street in a lot or something like that. They would not, thanks to the Teamsters, they would not cross their picket lines. When the strike was over, I see some of them around today, we put commemorative buttons on people to wear into the work site. Edith proudly puts her button on and returns to the steam line after the strike is over. And her boss, who's probably 35 years old, wearing synthetic ties and shirts and pants and stuff, walks up to her and says, "Edith, the strike's over, you need to take the button off." Edith says to him, "Listen, I've been standing up to those truck drivers for 3 nights, and I'm standing up to you now. The button stays on."
So I know that that some people who are in the strike want to talk, but I'd like to kind of start with people. If this is new information to you, or you have questions, or just a statement about what's happening in the union today compared to what's happening, what happened in 1987, we'd really like to hear from you, or if you have any further questions about what happened.
Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, because of what you have all done for me. I have not yet had to go out on strike with the state. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Nancy.
I was just going to say, thank you too, because the most fun I've ever had in my life was when we went on union. When we went on strike in '85, I think it was. All of our office, I was working in Boardman Child Welfare. We all participated. None of us wanted to go back to work. We were disappointed when the strike ended, but it was so much fun. Strikes, I guess, so fun. We don't get paid for stuff.
So what about some of you, maybe this is the first time you've heard it, or the first time you've heard so much about our strike? Comments? Sorry, I didn't see you back there.
Hi, I'm Steve Morrison. I work at SEIU Local 5 program staff member, and I also am part of the group of the SEIU Local 7901. And I've had the awesome opportunity to work with the retirees and on the case elections, the political change. And I just want to say you guys are so inspiring. I'm new to SEIU and to Oregon. I am a child labor union activist. My father worked for Metropolitan Transit Authority, and my mom worked
spend the other night making it.
By all means.
Yeah, well, it took me about 2 months to find the pictures buried in my study. Anyway, I was Roseanne Richard. I was hired in 1982, December, at Newport Adult and Family Services. And I didn't have union background, didn't know anything about unions, but I was appointed shop steward by default because nobody else wanted it. And so after I'd been there about 6 months, I heard there was going to be a meeting, district meeting or some kind of a meeting because our business agent was coming to town. So it was a Saturday morning, and so I went over. It was in a motel room, and there was our business agent and 2 other men in an actual room having drinks. And so I knock on the door, and they let me in. And why are you here? And I'm like, why are you guys here? And this, so I brought my pay stub because I was paying union dues. And so I presented it and said, I'm paying union dues, and I want to know what's going on. And they were kind of surprised. And so they said, well, you know, nobody hardly ever comes to these meetings. And I said, well, maybe you would move the meeting to a meeting room outside of a motel room, and there might be some more people that would come. So, and this was, you know, this was probably mid-'83, before all the kind of organizing we had, but they never did, to my knowledge, have another meeting in a motel room. So, in the lead up to the strike, this same business agent who used to come to our building every couple of months, you know, and I was working hard trying to get people to come to meetings, and they were pretty apathetic. And so he kept hammering me about how AFS was worthless, these women would do nothing. You know, meanwhile, Carla and I were kind of organizing. She was taking the South Coast, and I was trying to take the North End. We were meeting periodically in Yachats with this business agent, trying to get things going, you know, get stronger on the coast. So anyway, the word filtered down to we had 17 employees, 15 of them were women, we had 2 men. It started filtering down to these women that they were worthless, they weren't going to come, they wouldn't do anything, blah, blah, blah. So I was a little concerned when we were leading up to this strike about what kind of participation we would have. And the day we rolled out, 17 people did not show up for work. And 2 of them stayed out on some kind of religious whatever, I don't know what it was, but they were not at work. And the others picketed. And anybody who looks at this, I had 3 days of fun in the sun. It was kind of a perfect storm on the coast. We had gorgeous weather. And so people came and they had a great time. They brought their kids. The employment director, who was head of the employment office, bought us donuts every morning. And the other thing that happened was the women from Adult and Family Services, these worthless people who would do nothing, we took them to Beverly Beach where they picketed for 3 days because the parks workers didn't come to work, but they refused to picket. And so we had these women up there. By the way, our business agent, there was a picture of him here, but I think that was the only sighting of him the entire time. Because we had an the electrical workers had a building in the bayfront, and I went and talked to them, and they opened it up, and that was our strike headquarters. They got us a phone. I don't know what Gordon ever did, except to insult the workforce. But 2 things that really came out of that. So we had 15 picketers. 3 of us were flying squadron, so we were out 9 days. And we drove to Silver Falls Highway, or Silver Falls Park, 4 days in a row, the 3 of us, to picket at Silver Falls because they wouldn't picket. They were parks. I don't know what the deal was, but so we were up there with our picket signs, driving back and forth every day from Newport to do that. But I think the biggest thing I learned was we worked across the hall from Children's Services in Newport, who had probably the same number of workers as we did. And they could not get those people out. There were maybe 5 that went out and 10 that didn't, something like that. That work group never united. When the strike was over, they spent the next 2 years fighting with each other, the people who went out versus the ones that did not. In our workforce, they all came back, and they'd all been out together, and so we didn't have any of that contentious stuff that went on. So, and I think those women, I was looking at my pictures, and many of them are no longer with us. But I think of the good times we had those 3 days, how much fun they had with each other, and, you know, and they really committed, I think, because they knew they could go back to work in 3 days. So that was Newport. And actually, I think that Gordon and Alice parted ways fairly quickly after that. I don't know what happened, but he was gone.
She knew who you were talking about.
Yeah, that was the bad thing that came out of it. The legislature passed a law making the rolling strike illegal. So.
You know you're successful.
I'll talk about that.
Oh, wait.
Oh, is this live?
Are there other questions?
Okay, do you have any other questions out there?
Or comments?
Oh, push the button. On the top.
Is there other?
I came into OSH in '84, the end of '84. I didn't know any of this history about the union not being very strong because, well, I worked at OSH and they were like radically strong. And we went out on strike, the 2 wards on my unit, we had 100% participation. And I came out of a CWA AT&T family, so I just thought that's the way you do it. I was like, that's how you know. They're all strong and, you know. And my daughter, who's hiding over here, walked picket line with me. Now is an organizer for SEIU. The 8-year-old over here has been walking rallies and stuff since he's been a baby, so he goes, I don't know why workers don't get these things. It's not fair.
Right.
Back in the front. Right behind you. Oh, thank you.
Sorry, my pain pill only goes not so far. Anyway, you heard him talking about the 85 bargaining, which was such a disaster. I was on that bargaining team. And I'm here to tell you that was the worst experience of my entire life. And before I came to work for the state in '74, I'd actually organized a very small bargaining unit, all women except for 2 guys, who got paid a lot more than we did. We passed an NLRB election, and then I got fired for union organizing. I took a year off on their dime, and then I went to work for the state. Well, time marches on. I became a steward in 1980. And in '85, I was asked whether I would like to be a bargaining delegate. But then the person who was actually supposed to be a bargaining delegate at the table had to quit, and I'm all of a sudden at the central table representing DHS. And I don't know squat about bargaining. And as Alice was talking about, the executive director before her, Tom Gallagher, what a piece of crap. I never have. I'm not starting now. you need to take this. Take the deal. The money will go away. And they beat on us day after day about how they would take the money away if we didn't settle right now. Well, we did. And the rest of the unions just thought we were a bunch of wimps, which we were. So for whatever reason, I still haven't quite decided what prompted me to be the bargaining delegate the next time. Nobody else was, well, except for Gary. If you represented or not, another long story. But anyway, so, we started off, and next thing we know, Alice is the head of the bargaining team, and we don't know who the hell she is. That was exciting, and we had a little meeting down at Sybil's Pancake House to sort of work those little bugs out. But we actually started working on the campaign like in October. So then Neil Goldstein gets elected. And so we decided to extend the contract because he's such a buddy. So that was why we ended up, instead of going out on strike July 1, we went in September. Well, that was the last bargaining team that actually worked all on their own time. We went to work and worked 8 hours. We got off work and we went to bargaining. And we bargained till whenever. Now, I live in Molalla, and that's an hour drive. So we get home, or we get off at midnight, and I drive home. And then I get up, I go back to work at 7:30, and the same thing all over again. There are all kinds of wonderful stories, because we had a blast. But in the end, we finally got the settlement. And then, we actually, a month later, went to General Counsel. I have never been so jet-lagged in my entire life. It took months before I felt like anything but a dish rag. And I found out, and this is not any surprise to Alice or Ann, I love bargaining. It was my favorite thing.
And you were good at it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I hope so, otherwise that was sort of a waste of everybody's time. But from 1985 until I retired in 2003, I was on the bargaining team every year except for the 4 years I was president. At the time, look at this, the Constitution bylaws prohibited the president from being on the bargaining team. We got that changed, finally. But it made, to me, it was the place where you could make absolutely the most difference in workers' lives, was at the bargaining table. And I found out about what real power is. And I don't know whether you guys remember, but one time we were meeting at the forestry compound. There was a big, long building, and so, the tables were in the middle, and management was on that side, we were on this side. And because all of it was off the clock, 5 o'clock came, and workers started coming. And first they lined up behind us. And they finally, the standing room only, and then they started lining up behind management. And they kept lining up behind management until they were like looking right over their shoulders. Now we had been bargaining about some piddly little thing. It was like, we wanted it, and they were like, and they just wouldn't move, and it was stupid because it was going to cost them anything.
Yeah.
Didn't impinge any at all on any of their power. But as soon as those breaths started coming over their shoulders, they immediately decided, we need a caucus. So they were gone, they were actually gone for quite a while, and when they came back, all of a sudden, they figured out it wasn't such a big deal after all. And right there, it happened, and it was like, I'm actually a pretty good speaker. Logical, patient, pig-headed. But the bargaining team is nothing. Nothing if there aren't people breathing on management's back. That's what power is.
I was becoming active long in the early 80s. And I don't remember the exact dates, but I remember that we decided that the union needed some more money. And so they asked the general council, they passed a resolution to increase the dues, and they had to send it out to a vote, and they got soundly defeated. And so then we had to have another special general council to do it. And some of us, including me, went out throughout all the work sites, and I spent 2 or 3 weeks every day going to various work sites, talking to people, taking out flyers, telling why they was doing it. And, you know, when it first started going, it was pretty complex. And then when I started showing up, more people were showing up. And finally it came time to vote, and we passed it. And I know without the money that resolution got, that the union wouldn't be where it is today. I don't remember what year it was, but I know that she kind of lost track. But I know that was one of the greatest times I had in my life, was out there getting that put together and making sure that that passed and stuff.
Just a really quick shout out. My name is Lisa Hubbard, and I was hired earlier this year as the new organizing director here at 503. It is an honor and privilege so many decades later to follow in the footsteps of such amazing leadership. And in particular, I want to say that in 1988, one of my first jobs as an idealistic young feminist was working for the National Committee on Pay Equity. And so it was like all hail the women of Oregon, and what the labor movement had done in Oregon that really set the pace for what so many other unions subsequently were able to do in states and cities and municipalities across the country. That there's still so much work to do. No surprise, but thank you so much for your leadership, and great to be here with all of you tonight.
I think we're going to kind of wrap it up. We really appreciate everyone showing up. When we first started this, actually, John Lepink and I were going to do something in his backyard and invite a few people that wanted to have memories. And there was so much interest among staff and also traditional members in this. We're just so happy to be able to share this history. And at the next General Council, there may be a resolution to say, we need to stop blacking out this history. We need to be teaching it to all of our member leadership.